The memories he had forgotten for years slowly returned along with the terrifying demon that once hunted him. After the tragic events that befell the Lambert family in 2013, the memories of Josh and his son Dalton regarding their ability to astral project and everything they had experienced in the further were erased by Carl, a psychic who helped their family. From that moment on, they no longer remembered the existence of the dark realm known as the further. Even Dalton's memories of traveling through the spirit world were replaced with the belief that he had fallen into a coma because of an illness. 9 years later, Josh's mother, Lorraine, has passed away. The Lambert family reunites for her funeral, although Josh and Renee are now divorced. Dalton, Foster, and Callie live with their mother, and Josh has grown distant from his children, especially Dalton, since the divorce.
Ashes to ashes.
Oh, she loved you guys so much. I miss Grandma.
Ever since he was a child, Dalton has loved painting, and now he expresses his grief by creating a portrait of his late grandmother. With college just around the corner, Renee suggests that Josh use his break from work to drive Dalton to campus, hoping the trip will give them a chance to mend their strained relationship. Josh immediately refuses, convinced that Dalton would never want him there. At the same time, Renee unexpectedly notices Carl attending Lorraine's funeral. Afraid Josh might recognize the psychic whose existence had been erased from his memory through hypnosis, she quickly distracts him. Shortly afterward, Renee leaves the funeral with the children. As Josh walked toward his car, he unexpectedly crossed paths with Carl. Feeling that the man's face was strangely familiar, Josh approached him and started a conversation. With no way to avoid him anymore, Carl admitted that he had been an old friend of Lorraine's. However, because of the hypnosis, he still couldn't remember who Carl really was.
What's your name? Carl. Nice to meet you, Carl. Yeah. Bye, Josh.
After thinking about Renee's suggestion, Josh finally gathered the courage to text Dalton, telling him that he wanted to drive him to college the following week. He expected Dalton to turn him down, but to his surprise, his son agreed. Josh couldn't hide his excitement. However, as he was about to drive away, he failed to notice a mysterious man slowly approaching him from behind. A week later, Josh finally drove Dalton to his college. During the trip, he tried several times to start a conversation with his son, but the atmosphere between them remained awkward. After arriving, Josh helped Dalton carry his belongings to his dorm room. Dalton had chosen to major in art, a passion he had loved ever since he was a child. While unpacking, Josh came across the portrait of Lorraine that Dalton had painted and immediately complimented his son's work. Dalton, however, admitted that whenever he looked at his grandmother, he always felt as if Lorraine had been hiding something from him. It was a feeling that had lingered in his mind for years. Hearing this, Josh apologized for rarely spending time with his children since his divorce from Renee. He also confessed that over the past few years, he had become increasingly forgetful, sometimes even forgetting to make time to see all three of his children. In the middle of their conversation, a young woman suddenly walked into the room. She introduced herself as Chris Winslow, Dalton's assigned roommate. Both Josh and Dalton were surprised to discover that his roommate was a woman. Chris explained that the college had probably assumed she was a man because of her name. She then stepped out to sort out the room assignment mistake. Before leaving, Josh suggested that Dalton attend the frat party so he could make new friends more easily, but Dalton brushed off the suggestion. Instead, Dalton dismissed the gesture as nothing more than an act, knowing Josh had only agreed to drive him to college because Renee had asked him to. Those words struck a nerve, and Josh couldn't hide his frustration, never expecting his own son to see him that way. Caught up in the heat of the moment, Dalton lashed out, saying that Josh's short temper was the very reason Renee had divorced him. The remark left Josh speechless. Without another word, he walked out of Dalton's room and headed back to his car. It wasn't until his father had gone that Dalton realized he had gone too far. Meanwhile, Josh could only carry the weight of disappointment and heartbreak as he watched the son who had once been so close to him grow so distant. That night, Chris explained that she would be staying in Dalton's room for just one night before being moved to a different dorm the following day. Before going to bed, the two of them chatted for a while. Chris then asked Dalton to play her melodica, and he happily played a song composed by his mother.
What's that?
It's just something my mom wrote.
During their conversation, Dalton admitted that he couldn't remember anything from when he was 10 years old. As far as he knew, he had simply fallen into a coma after contracting meningitis. Ever since then, he had developed an intense fear of the dark and could only sleep with the lights on.
I've been afraid of the dark.
The following day, Josh tried calling Dalton, but when his phone went straight to voicemail, he left a message apologizing and promising to make things right between them. Meanwhile, Dalton attended his first art class with Professor Armagan. Each student was asked to bring one of their best works, and Dalton chose the portrait of his late grandmother. Armagan was known for being a strict professor. After examining a painting by one of her students, Alec, she criticized it for relying solely on technique rather than genuine emotion. When Alec refused to tear up his own work, Armageddon immediately threw him out of the class. Witnessing this, Dalton tore up his own painting as well, believing that he too had not truly painted from his soul. Armageddon then instructed the class to dive deep into their subconscious and paint whatever emerged from within. Dalton closed his eyes and followed her guidance. Without realizing it, his hand began painting a mysterious door that felt strangely familiar, as though it were connected to a forgotten part of his past. He became so absorbed in the process that he accidentally cut his hand, causing drops of blood to stain the painting. Even so, Dalton had no idea why he had painted the door in the first place. Meanwhile, Josh decided to undergo a CT scan to find out what was causing his increasing memory problems. After explaining the procedure, the doctor placed him inside the CT scanner. But as the scan began, the lights around him suddenly went out. Josh immediately called for the doctor, only to hear a mysterious voice telling him that someone else was in the room with him. Terrified, he repeatedly pressed the emergency call button, but no one responded. Just as he began shouting for help, a horrifying figure suddenly appeared before him.
Dr. Brower! Let me out, let me out, let me out! Let me out!
Moments later, the doctor entered the room and found Josh in a panic. Josh immediately demanded to know why the lights had gone out, but the doctor insisted that they had never gone off. The doctor then explained that Josh had simply fallen asleep for about 15 minutes during the examination. After reviewing the CT scan results, the doctor confirmed that there was nothing wrong with Josh's brain. Unbeknownst to him, what he had just experienced was no dream. He had unknowingly entered the further once again as his astral projection ability slowly began to awaken. Back in his dorm room, Dalton tried to wipe the blood off his painting. Instead of disappearing, the blood spread across the canvas, turning the door in the painting a deep red. The longer he stared at it, the stronger the feeling that the door was somehow connected to his forgotten past. Suddenly, the power went out, sending Dalton into a panic as his lifelong fear of the dark returned. With the electricity gone, he used a portable power station to turn on his desk lamp. Strangely, the light glowed red because the bulb was somehow stained with blood. As if that weren't enough, Dalton noticed a bloody handprint on Chris's bedsheet. Assuming it had come from his own injured hand, he tried to wipe it away, but something terrifying suddenly happened. Moments later, Chris walked into the room, and everything had mysteriously returned to normal. She told Dalton that she had been assigned a new room directly above his, then invited him to attend the frat party that evening. The two of them headed to the party, where a quirky student named Nick was giving a speech to the freshmen. Annoyed by his arrogant attitude, Chris convinced Dalton to sneak into Nick's room and pull a prank on him. As they searched through the room, they discovered several prohibited items. While Chris stepped outside to get rid of them, Dalton heard someone inside the bathroom. When he peeked in, he saw a horrifying student vomiting into the sink. The ghost slowly approached him, repeatedly telling Dalton to close a door. Confused by the warning, Dalton had no idea what it meant. Moments later, he heard Nick returning and quickly hid beneath the bed. By the time Nick checked the bathroom, the ghost had vanished. But as soon as Nick left, the ghost reappeared and began terrorizing Dalton, leaving him screaming in fear. A few moments later, Chris rushed back into the room and asked what had happened. Dalton insisted that he had just seen someone inside the room. Without realizing it, the astral projection abilities that had been dormant for years were slowly beginning to awaken. Sensing that something was terribly wrong, Dalton immediately told Chris they needed to leave. After returning to his room, Dalton listened to Josh's voicemail, in which he apologized and expressed his desire to repair their relationship while continuing to work on his painting of the red door. This time, his hand unconsciously began painting the figure of a man, even though he had no idea who it was. Before long, an overwhelming wave of drowsiness overcame him, and he fell asleep while sitting in his chair. Unbeknownst to him, his long-forgotten astral projection ability awakened once again, allowing his spirit to leave his body. Carrying a lantern to light his way, Dalton wandered through the now eerily silent campus. Curious, he made his way to Chris's room, where she was fast asleep, and began playing her melodica. Strangely, Chris could hear the melody, but was unable to see Dalton. Strangely, when Josh regained consciousness in the real world, the box was still in his hands. Inside, he found several old photographs of a young Lorraine with a man named Ben Burton, whom Josh believed to be his biological father. To his shock, Ben's face was identical to the mysterious figure who had just chased him. The box also contained a psychiatric hospital patient identification bracelet bearing Ben Burton's name. The discovery convinced Josh that everything happening to him was deeply connected to his family's forgotten past. Determined to uncover the truth, he began researching his father's history. Hospital records revealed that Ben had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and had undergone electroconvulsive therapy. At the same time, Josh realized that his astral projection abilities had actually been inherited from his father. However, the most shocking discovery was a record confirming that Ben Burton had died. Meanwhile, back in art class, Professor Armagan once again instructed her students to draw inspiration from their personal experiences and pour them into their artwork. This time, she encouraged them to dive into the darkest memories hidden within their subconscious. Dalton followed her instructions once more. As he continued painting, the mysterious figure in his artwork became increasingly clear. Convinced that everything was connected to his forgotten past, Dalton called his younger brother Foster to ask about the red door that kept appearing in his mind. Unfortunately, Foster couldn't remember anything and simply suggested that Dalton ask Renee instead. But Dalton didn't want to worry his mother all over again.
Did you ask Mom? No, I don't want to worry her. Well, I'm not going then.
Meanwhile, Chris began investigating the strange events surrounding Dalton. While browsing YouTube, she came across information suggesting that his symptoms matched those of someone with the ability to astral project. She then found a YouTube channel run by Specs and Tucker, two paranormal investigators who had once worked alongside Elise. In one of their videos, they explained that Dalton likely possessed the ability of astral projection, allowing a person's soul to leave their physical body while asleep and travel to another dimension. Elise referred to that dimension as the Further, a dark realm filled with tormented spirits where time itself does not exist. The video also featured old footage of Elise explaining that anyone who enters the Further can easily be sensed by the spirits trapped there.
I am Elise. When you astral project, they can smell you. They want life. The further you travel, the riskier the journey becomes.
Desperate for another chance at life, those spirits may pursue, harm, or even attempt to possess the person's body in order to return to the world of the living. Dalton suddenly remembered the ghost of the deceased student he had encountered in Nick's room, the one who had repeatedly told him to close a door. He became convinced that the ghost was referring to the same red door that had been appearing in his paintings. Hoping to meet the ghost again and uncover the truth, Dalton and Chris returned to Nick's dorm building. They found an empty room to carry out their plan. After turning off all the lights, Dalton sat in the corner while Chris guided him by counting down, helping him astral project once again.
Okay, you ready? 7, 5, 1. Are you floating yet?
Moments later, the room door slowly opened on its own, signaling that Dalton's soul had entered the Further. Afterward, Dalton headed back to Nick's room, hoping to find the ghost of the deceased student again. However, when he arrived, the ghost was nowhere to be found. At the same time, the power suddenly went out throughout the dorm, causing Nick to panic and leave his room to investigate. Realizing the situation was getting out of control and worried that Chris might be discovered inside the empty room, Dalton immediately tried to return to his body. But before he could escape the Further, a mysterious hand suddenly grabbed his astral form, repeatedly begging him to close the red door. After breaking free, Dalton was horrified to find Chris being strangled by the red face demon that had once hunted him years ago.
Oh, God.
Fortunately, Nick entered the room after noticing something was wrong and found Chris unconscious, quickly rushing to help her. At that exact moment, Dalton managed to return to his body, causing the demon to disappear and stop attacking Chris. Chris was immediately taken to the campus health clinic, and fortunately she wasn't seriously injured. Even so, she blamed Dalton, believing she had been attacked by the demon because of him. She then urged Dalton to stop entering the Further before something even worse happened. More confused than ever by everything he had experienced, Dalton decided to call Foster. He asked whether his younger brother remembered anything from the time he had supposedly been in a coma, explaining that he had recently been painting a man holding a hammer in front of a red door without even realizing it. Foster admitted that he remembered very little because he had been so young at the time. However, he vaguely recalled himself, Dalton, and Renee running into the basement to hide. Hearing that was enough to trigger a fragment of Dalton's lost memories. He immediately hung up the phone, returned to his painting, and continued working on it. This time the man's face became much clearer, and to Dalton's shock, it looked almost exactly like his own father. Meanwhile, Josh went to Renee's house to talk about his father. He explained that he had only recently discovered his biological father, Ben Burton, had died after jumping from the roof of a psychiatric hospital in 1978. Josh also showed Renee the last letter his father had left behind, which read, "It ends with me." However, he still couldn't understand what those words meant. Josh had begun to fear that he was suffering from the same condition as his father and worried that it might have been passed down to Dalton as well. Unable to keep the truth hidden any longer, Renee finally confessed that Josh wasn't crazy. Both he and Dalton had possessed the ability to astral project, allowing their souls to travel into the further. She also showed Josh an old photograph from his childhood, revealing that he had been haunted by the bride in black ever since he was young. According to Lorraine, Ben Burton had possessed the same ability. But because she never knew how to save her husband, Ben was ultimately consumed by it and eventually took his own life. Fearing the same fate would befall Josh and Dalton, Lorraine and Renee asked Carl to erase their memories of their astral projection abilities and everything they had experienced in the further. Unfortunately, although their memories were gone, the trauma remained, leaving Josh forgetful and unable to control his emotions. Hearing the truth, Josh was devastated to learn that he had spent years living in confusion without ever knowing why. Renee then revealed that she hadn't left him because she had stopped loving him, but because she wanted to protect their children from experiencing those terrifying events ever again. Just as Josh was about to leave, Foster stopped him and showed him a photo of one of Dalton's paintings. He asked whether the man in the painting was his father, before explaining that Dalton had recently been experiencing a series of strange incidents and kept seeing a mysterious red door. Hearing this, Renee immediately realized that the past they had worked so hard to bury was now threatening Dalton once again, and that they had to act before it was too late. Back with Dalton, he texted Chris, telling her that he was now certain he had never actually been in a coma and was determined to uncover what had really happened to him. Back in his room, Dalton couldn't stop staring at the painting of the man holding a hammer. Suddenly, the painting seemed to pull him back into a memory from 9 years earlier. In the memory, Renee was hiding with Dalton and Foster in the basement, while Josh, who had been possessed, was trying to attack them. Determined to save his father, Dalton chose to enter the further once again.
No, it's too dangerous. I can do it though.
At the same time, Josh broke through the basement door and attacked Renee. After knocking her to the ground, he raised a hammer and prepared to strike Dalton, but in an instant, Dalton's vision shifted into the further. There, he saw the wooden puppet that represented fragments of his forgotten memories from the further. He also remembered the moment his parents found him unconscious for months and witnessed the time Josh rescued him from the red-faced demon. Suddenly, the red-faced demon appeared right beside Dalton. A short time later, Dalton returned to the real world. Just then, Chris entered his room carrying a lamp, knowing how terrified he had always been of the dark. But this time, Dalton calmly told her that he was no longer afraid. While Chris was busy fixing the lamp, she had no idea that Dalton's body had already been possessed by the red-faced demon, while his true soul remained chained inside the further. Now, under the demon's control, Dalton began preparing to attack Chris.
Hey.
Meanwhile, after learning the truth about his past, Josh entered the further with Renee's help to rescue his son. Once inside, he briefly encountered a horrifying version of Dalton under the demon's influence. As he searched for Dalton's soul, Josh caught a glimpse of his younger self carrying young Dalton out of the further before continuing his search deeper into the further. Moments later, Josh finally found Dalton's soul chained inside the red-faced demon's lair. Dalton was still consumed by fear, haunted by the memory of the day Josh had nearly killed him with a hammer. Josh explained that he had never truly wanted to hurt him. At the time, his body had been possessed by an evil spirit from the further, and now the same thing was happening to Dalton. Before they could escape, the red-faced demon appeared. Josh quickly freed Dalton from the chains and told him to return to his body while he stayed behind to hold the demon off.
Help me hold the door! We gotta have to find something to block it, something to seal it! Come on, it's okay. You go.
The moment Dalton returned to the real world, the demon's control over his body was broken. At the same time, several other spirits escaped from the further and began surrounding Chris. Fortunately, as soon as Dalton regained consciousness, the spirits instantly vanished. Meanwhile, Josh's body remained unconscious in the real world as Renee desperately tried to wake him. Inside the further, Josh declared that everything had to end with him. Moments later, he realized that the red-faced demon could no longer open the red door. Black paint began dripping from above, making Josh realize that Dalton was covering his painting of the red door with black paint in the real world. By sealing the painting, Dalton closed the red door, cutting off the red-faced demon's path to the world of the living. After everything was over, Chris told Dalton to forget everything that had happened. but Dalton refused. He believed that painful memories couldn't simply be erased, they had to be faced. Inside the further, Josh carried the box that had belonged to his father. As he looked at the old photograph of his parents, he heard a man's voice and finally realized it was Ben Burton, who appeared carrying a lantern. Ben explained that he had been trying to tell Josh all along that the past wasn't something to be forgotten, but something that had to be faced. After Ben disappeared, Josh picked up the lantern and used it to find his way back. Moments later, Josh finally regained consciousness. Not long afterward, Dalton called Renee to ask about his father. Renee assured him that Josh had made it back safely and was doing fine, filling Dalton with relief. Foster, who now knew the truth about everything that had happened in their past, immediately went over to see his father. The following morning, before Josh left, Renee asked him to visit the children more often. Hearing her request, Josh smiled and promised that he would spend more time with his family. It also seemed to hint that his relationship with Renee was beginning to heal. As Josh was about to get into his car, he was greeted by an elderly woman who introduced herself as one of Lorraine's old friends. For some reason, her face felt strangely familiar, yet Josh couldn't remember who she was. The woman was actually the spirit of Elise. During their brief conversation, Josh shared his hope of rebuilding his relationship with his family and admitted that there were still so many things he wished he could say to his mother. Elise reassured him that Lorraine would always hear him and encouraged Josh to stay strong because a brighter future awaited both him and Dalton. After getting into his car, Josh glanced back, but Elise had already disappeared. Meanwhile, Dalton returned to painting and placed his finished artwork above his bed. This time, the painting depicted Josh rescuing him from the further. Seeing himself become part of Dalton's artwork, Josh smiled with pride. The painting became a symbol that the bond between father and son had finally been restored. And with that, the story comes to an end.